Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, how to heal childhood trauma in adulthood. If you've listened to episode 336 with Dr. Gabor Maté, then you're going to enjoy today's conversation as it features his eldest son, who is the co-author of his latest book, The Myth of Normal. I had the pleasure of speaking with Daniel Maté. I have to say it was one of the best conversations I had on the show, not only because we talked about topics that I deeply care about, but because there was flow, presence, depth, and synergy. I love when guests are open to wherever the conversation will take and are not attached to delivering a specific message. I went Joe Rogan on him, so it's a long episode, but worth the listen. And you don't need to listen to it in one sitting. It's a wide-ranging conversation about the parent-child relationship and how childhood trauma affects us as adults and how we don't have to suffer now and be prisoners of our past. We have a choice and responsibility to heal. Daniel Maté is an award-winning musical theater dramatist, songwriter, and educator. Daniel's original musicals include The Trouble with Doug, Hansel and Gretel, Heidi and Gunther, The Longing and the Short of It. Daniel's work has been produced and or presented at the Kennedy Center for the Arts, DC, Lincoln Center, NYC, and in locations from California to Florida, Vancouver to Prince Edward Island, and Paris to Denmark. He is the recipient of the prestigious Edward Kleben Prize for Lyrics, as well as a Jonathan Larson Grant and ASCAP Foundation's Cole Porter Award for Excellence in Music and Lyrics. With Dr. Gabor Maté, Daniel is the co-author of The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. The father-son pair have collaborated on the Hello Again workshop since 2016, leading programs in Vancouver, Toronto, and New York. A book version is currently in progress. Daniel also runs the world's only mental chiropractic service, Take a Walk with Daniel, and is the host of the YouTube program Lyrics to Go. I hope you'll learn some new things from this episode, rethink certain ideas, see your children and yourself with fresh eyes, and maybe see your relationship with your parents with a renewed perspective. Childhood is a short period in the entire span of the parent-child relationship. Yes, it's impactful and formative, but if you think about it, we're going to have more time with our kids as adult children. The adult-child-parent relationship is much longer, which means there is always hope and potential for reparation, improvement, and transformation of that relationship. I would love to recommend a few relevant past episodes that complement today's conversation, but for the sake of saving time, since it's a long episode, I'll just put them in the show notes, and I hope you'll check them out. They are phenomenal. Please enjoy this soulful, deep, and honest conversation with Daniel Maté. Well, Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Anna.
Congratulations, first of all, on this fantastic, phenomenal, groundbreaking book, The Myth of Normal, that you co-authored with your amazing dad.
Thanks so much. It's pretty wild.
I'm sure it is. I used to envy people like you whose parents are famous, incredible human beings in the world, and then they collaborate together. I always wanted to do something with my dad. I never did, but I always had that little envy in the deep corner of my heart. So, what was it like collaborating with him on the book project?
It was, I mean, look, it was complicated. At times it was very exasperating, always educational. But I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a huge privilege and a massive opportunity. For all of my dad and I's complications in our relationship, we admire each other very, very much. As our relationship moves along, we're able to better appreciate the differences between us and the productive differences, especially when working together, meaning that we each have different things to contribute to each other and to contribute to the work we're doing. For me personally, it was very affirming. It just so happens to be my karma or my life path or my fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it, that my father is an increasingly famous person. And he's famous for providing healing information for people and for guiding people through their darkest traumas and helping them to understand each other, understand themselves and their lives and their struggles and their afflictions, to sometimes heal from those afflictions, and especially to become more conscious of the ways in which they, either as parents or children or both, were affected by early life. That is a particular gift and curse, I would say, to be the child of that, because I get messages being like, oh, I wish your father was my father, or hashtag King Gabor I saw the other day. Gabor is my guru, you know.
Sorry.
And I'm like, okay, you feel that way. Good. You know, and I get why. His persona in the world, and it's not a false persona. It's the niche he's carved for himself with his gifts and his talents. It's 100%, legitimate. It's just that my entire life, my relationship to him happened inside the four walls of our home, not outside. So when he comes home from doing all that, and my mother and my siblings were the recipients of the flip side, which he's written about too. So I have a father who's very candid about his foibles and flaws, which sounds really good. And it is really good, except because he knows so much about childhood trauma. And since a very young age, he's been able to sort of explain to me, dad-splain my difficulties in terms of my own childhood. In some ways, I never got to develop my own rendition of my own story. And in some ways, I think in subtle ways, maybe unintended, certainly unintended, but consequential nonetheless, there are ways in which it preempted my own authentic anger or sadness or grief or rebellion or individuation, because in a way it tied me even closer to him. Oh, I am the way I am because of him, because of his trauma and all that. Well, that's all true, but that's the kind of thing you want to come to yourself in your own healing journey rather than inherit it, have it like a hand-me-down. Because the effect on me was it left me even less clear on who I am and more tied to, oh, okay, the primary relationship in my life is my parents. And then I'm told, okay, now you're an adult, now figure yourself out. So there was that complicated, what you might call a fusion dynamic, where it's like too close for comfort. And I wrote a song once when I was 25 years old, and I called it a symbiotic incest of emotion. That's a real catchy lyric, isn't it? Real pop hit. But that's what it was like for me. That's how I felt. It was this intensely confusing hall of mirrors. So fast forward to my mid-40s, and I jump aboard this magnum opus project of my father's, who's been struggling with it by this point. By the time I jumped aboard 4 years ago, he'd been working on it for over 6 years. He'd already sent back book advance money on a contract he had because he was too daunted by it. He was really at loose ends. And he sent me a book proposal that he had written. He said, what do you think? I said, I can help you with this, but I'm going to need to be your co-author.
Ooh,
So
good.
I am, and what that meant in that moment is I see my value. I see my unique. I know I have something to offer that he doesn't have. Now I had to deal with my own insecurity about that. Oh, my dad's coattails. I'm just the only reason I've got this nice book contract is because of my famous father. Well, in a way, that's true. But the other side of it is my dad couldn't do this book without me. And he said that repeatedly. And that's because I brought something original to the table. And what I brought that was original is my own particular gifts, which are separate from his. So even just having that scaffolding of an external project to work on, that's not for us, it's for people, it's for all people, it's for the world, meant that we had a framework inside which we could grow apart, but in relationship with each other. And I needed that. It was really, really helpful. And then the experience of it was going in and out of flow. And it was much more bumpy at the start because he was used to writing alone. Now I'm a musical theater writer. That's one of the things I do in the world. And when I introduce myself, when someone asks, what do you do? That's my first answer because that's what I put the most time in on. I'm not Gabor's son to me. When I think of myself, I write music and lyrics. I write musicals. The fact that I haven't had a big commercial hit doesn't change the fact that I went to grad school for it. I've been doing it for 15 years. And it's what I consider my most unique set of gifts. No one else in my family is a songwriter. My mom's an artist. Maybe that's the closest that comes to it. So that really feels like mine, which means that I've collaborated a lot. Musical theater is an extremely collaborative art form, perhaps the most collaborative, involves the most people. And often I've written shows with other people. I write the lyrics, they write the music, vice versa. I write the songs, they write the script, the book. So I came in with a skill set of knowing how to work with people. I'd say more than my dad did. And he really, he's usually the guy. He's the one with the attention on him. He's the one who has the answers. He's the expert. He's the guru. And so learning how to assert myself without being a petulant teenager about it, especially in moments when he would reject my contributions, by which I just mean he'd write a chapter, he'd send it to me, I'd look at it, I'd be like, all right, let me completely rework this, which I did on many, if not most of the chapters, like the beginnings of the chapters, the ends of the chapters, the way it's structured, the story each chapter tells was very much something that came from my storytelling and lyric and music writing instincts. And at first, when we started writing the book, there were times when I would send him, let's say at 6 p.m., the work I'd done on the chapter that day. I've been working on it all day. And at 6:15, I get a urgent WhatsApp phone call from him. And I answer it, and it's a video call. And he's like right in the camera, and he looks really serious. And he's like, well, Daniel, you're a wonderful writer. First of all, it's very finely written. But this is not my voice, and I don't recognize myself in it. And it's over. And at first, I got really offended. I was like, Dad, this is not how you give feedback. And then I started to realize he's just insecure. My dad, my overbearing, imperious, domineering, again, these are through the lens of me as a child, father is just anxious and neurotic, just like I am when I'm writing a musical. Like I'm usually the anxious collaborator. So I said to him, Dad, new rule. Bill Maher on his show has new rule. New rule. When I send you a rewrite, you sleep on it. Let's try that. Because what would normally happen is we'd have this big fight towards the end of the day. And I'd be like, you're being closed-minded. And he's like, well, it has to be my voice and blah, 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 blah. And then the next morning I'd get an email from him and be like, I reread it. It's fantastic. And I'm just like, well, why did we go through all that in the first place? So setting up new architecture, new structures, new ways of working together, which if you actually look at it, if you zoom out, what am I doing? I'm learning to set healthy boundaries with my father without being combative or accusatory or reactive. It's just a matter of what works because we have a practical goal here. We have an intention. We want to share something with people. So that generalized, the writing of the book was scaffolding. It was a structure inside which, like a lattice work that a pea plant can grow on it or an ivy can climb, and then it forms its own, it gets stronger by doing that. And I think for both of us, it gave us a structure inside which us two old dogs could learn some new tricks with each other.
That's interesting. I want to go back what you said before about your parents' trauma, his trauma being this theme, or he knew that was the case. And then you had to discover who you were later when you hit adulthood. But growing up, It's a very sensitive topic. I don't even know how to ask a question because I definitely felt that there were times that I used my own trauma to influence my child, but I don't want to earn pity points. It's my own story, it's my own trauma, whether it's hurting my parenting or revealing things about myself. I don't want to burden my daughter or make her part of my misery or make her understand the magnitude of how much I suffered. I definitely have made mistakes in this area myself. And I've shared on a podcast the story of the Doc Marten shoes when she wanted shoes. I'll put that in the show notes for the listener. And it resonated with people big time. But here's what I want to know. Like, what point he knew, because he talks about his trauma openly, right? And he doesn't talk about much about other forms of trauma. He tells this one story of when he was, which I find interesting because he is very selective, but there is a whole lot of things around this man. There's more to the story than just one piece of the puzzle. And I tried to get to it in my podcast with him, but he wasn't up for it. I could tell. And I respect him. He's my dad's age. And, I'm not going to challenge him right on the podcast. And it was towards the end. But it's reductionistic, his story to me. I feel like I want to know more. And I asked him a question about when he immigrated to Canada when he was 13. How was it for him? He told me a little bit about his family. However, he tells the story when he was little, his mom gave him away, right? It's the story of Gabor Maté that we know of, this abandonment and it's this through line.
It's the superhero origin story.
Yes, the origin story.
Spider-Man, was bit by a radioactive spider, and from then on he had superpowers, but he had a broken heart.
Yes. So when did he become aware of that, like connected the dots between his past and his present? And did he use it in a way that I described, that I misused it a couple of times?
I'm not sure if I can answer those questions directly. I really want to respond to things you said in your lead up to it because they're so interesting to me. And I've literally never heard anyone else say it, but they are very active observations for me. And they are points of great curiosity and sometimes frustration. I don't know when he started to put the pieces together. I have to have a feeling that, I have to believe that he always knew the Holocaust had something to do with his pain. I'm sure my mom knew that from the minute she met him in the late 70s, right? Or 60s, I should say. And, I grew up in a family which talked openly about the Holocaust. So it wasn't difficult to intuit that the heaviness and the darkness and the sadness, the grief, and maybe the anger that I grew up around had something to do with coming from the darkest time in recent modern European history. Did he ever use it? I don't know. Not consciously, probably. But I do want to talk about what you just said, because the word reductionist or reductive that you used is a word that I've put to him before, and he doesn't really want to have much to do with it. One of the things that frustrated me growing up, or frustrated me in retrospect, is, that there's this one narrative that this is why. It's that early childhood. It's the Holocaust. And I don't want to say playing the Holocaust card, because that seems to make it sound manipulative or
minimizes it. Yeah.
Well, it overplays the card, I think, in some ways, because I believe, in my experience, my first few years were not the only traumas in my life.
Yeah.
There are things that happened when there are things that have, Now, whenever my dad's working with people, I've noticed he'll say, "When's the first time you felt that way?" And they'll say, "Well, when I was 12. He'll say, "Okay, but before that." "Okay, when I was 7. Okay, but before that." And then they get to 2 or 3 years old. "Yes, that's the answer." Okay. Now, on a certain level, yes, absolutely. There's the original wound when we're the most malleable. Of course, that's clearly true. However, the day I arrived at kindergarten, age 5, had nothing to do with my parents. I arrived on the scene and I was already emotionally wounded from home. I get to the playground. I'm a very gregarious, talkative kid. And the kids looked at me like I was an alien, and they started calling me walkie-talkie because I couldn't read social cues. And I was just kind of guileless, and I didn't have social skills. And then I spent most of my elementary school years feeling socially tortured and deeply, deeply sad and hurt by the way I couldn't seem to fit in. Now, I don't know what was going on at home at the time. I think my parents were sympathetic to it, but that was really damaging to me. And for me to try to ingest the message, well, that's all because of what happened to you when you were 1 or 2. It's kind of like, no, fuck off. Like, let me have this one. Like, this happened to, like, if it all goes back to my parents, nothing is mine in a sense.
Oh, so good.
And I said to my dad when I was 8 or 9, I think, I don't know where you end and I begin. And that was the trauma, the constant sort of the inability to see me as a separate person, the intolerance of my separateness, my difference, which induced me to try to please them in various ways or fight with them in various ways or overcome it, which of course didn't help my social life. It meant I was so attached to my parents that I couldn't form secure attachments with my peers. And again, my dad talks a lot about the dangers of peer orientation. I wish I'd been more peer oriented, not in the sense of getting my cues from my peers, but I wish I'd been able to form deeper and more secure connections with my peers. So I guess you could say it's intersectional, to use a buzzword. And I'm always very wary of any reductive explanations. And in terms of my curiosity about my father, I hear him talk about the separation from his mother. I've really had to press him. In fact, I did so on stage once at our Hello Again workshop. What about your father, Dad? What about your relationship with your dad?
What about your brothers?
What about
it
your
turns
brother?
out he has siblings too. I'm like, holy cow, there's more to this man than just
Absolutely.
that one story.
And I think that, I mean, it's his business how he wants to look at his past. But I know that for me, when it becomes a scripted one-to-one, this is this way because that was that way, it just is not true to life for me. That just doesn't ring true. It makes for a good teaching example. And of course, it's not untrue, but it's not the whole truth. And as an artist, I'm always looking for the complications, the in-betweens, the mixed feelings, and one of the wounds of my childhood, or one of the sadnesses, is I don't remember my father, when I was struggling, saying to me, hey, I've struggled with that too. He would give me the answers. He would explain. He would give me some sophisticated theory or psychological or spiritual truisms, which may be true, but they were pitched over my head. And they weren't actually, like, what a child wants is to be seen for what they're actually going through. And what I would have loved is a father who could say, hey, you're having girl trouble? Yeah, man. At that age, wow, I was really confused. I was really intimidated. I got bullied too. I just never heard that. I've heard it kind of come out since I've been an adult. And that's like, it's very nourishing to hear that. It's relating. And my dad had trouble relating to me as a child. He saw my intellect, which was very much, I mean, I was born with a gifted mind, I guess, or the potential for it. I was very sensitive. I was very bright, but my intellect was honed as a coping mechanism to try and keep up with them and keep some sense of.
Maybe like his, maybe his is the same way. And maybe that was a threat to him because.
Oh yeah. He said it. He said it. He's told me that I'm the only person he's ever met who's smarter than him.
And you are so different than him. I mean, even growing up, when you said you didn't know, where you began and ended and where it was this merged fusion, you were so different. If you were very typical or like him, I would say, yeah. If you were mini him, I would understand that. But you were so different. It sounds like you are different and you were different. But it just tells me how our own pain clouds our own thinking and perception of the reality and takes us away from the present so that we can't even see the child who is unfolding in front of us.
And it's very, very painful for the child to be seen through a filter that has nothing to do with them. That's in itself traumatic, because you just don't, a child needs to be recognized in order to be able to recognize themselves. You get modeled. I mean, literally neurologically, I learned this by writing the book with him. I mean, he's the one who knows all the science and was able to bring all the sort of research. It's fascinating. And our brain circuits develop through mirroring. And if you're never mirrored, but you only have versions of you imposed, then you internalize those, and that becomes your superego. And your ego is always trying to please your superego, and you have this civil war going on inside you, but you never develop a healthy ego, a sense inside yourself of, I know who I am, and I know that who I am is acceptable and unique and special, but doesn't need to be made extra special in order to be valid. You know, all those things that healthy development depend on. So yeah, it's definitely a big, and I'm not a parent, so I'm not here to lecture parents. I have no idea how difficult it is. It must be, I can't even imagine what it takes to be a parent and how much you have to filter through. And of course, I'd say most parents, including my parents, hopefully they pass down a fraction of the trauma and the pain, or at least a less direct version of it, and they give their children more resources than they had. And that's certainly been the case in my family. But just not to be seen for who you are, including the things you're going through at age 6, 9, 12, 17, 22. And that leaves a residue, that leaves a mark. It takes time to sort through that, to recover, to feel like the authority on your own life, to have some authorship of your own life.
Did you worked when you were little? Would you say you worked hard to prove it to him? At what point did you give up and say, forget this, I'm not going to try even to get them to recognize me and see me who I am who I am? Or is it becomes that part of you becomes so vulnerable that the ground is so shaky you can't even find yourself? Like that's a whole nother journey.
Yeah, I mean, we have a chapter called A Sturdy or Fragile Foundation, and I'm quoted in that chapter about the sense of insecurity in my childhood, so that the floor was not the floor in my childhood.
And the dream that you had, yeah.
I would literally have recurring nightmares where the floor would open up, and sometimes I would try to claw my way through the floor to get to a better reality, but it would also be a nightmare. And it's not hard to figure out what that metaphor was about. When did I give that up? Ask me tomorrow. I mean, I still struggle with that. That program, Prove Yourself, and especially around this book. I mean, you look at the title, Gabor Maté, MD, with Daniel Maté. Now, if I was a fully secure person, I'd be like, that's super cool. I helped my dad write a book, and I've got my own work, and I do my own things, and like, we collaborated. In our next book, it'll be Gabor Maté and Daniel Maté, the one on parent-adult-child relationships. And in fact, if we do it alphabetically, it'll be Daniel and Gabor. But with all the attention he gets with this book, and the fact that he's done most of the interviews, he flew to Austin and did Rogan, he's on Democracy Now!, I found myself listening. Oh, did he use the pronoun I wrote the book or we wrote the book? Is it my chapter or our chapter? And I have to catch myself. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, because that's the little kid in me constantly looking for validation. And I still have a tendency sometimes when something happens and I'm triggered and upset, I go immediately to email and I write I tell myself, I'm just going to write a short email. And 10 paragraphs later, I press send and I'm like, that's great. That cleaned it up. And of course it doesn't, because I'm just perpetuating that's what I used to do as a kid, not email, obviously, but handwritten letters. I became part of the reason I'm such a good writer is I had to learn to express myself in a way that my big, completely in control parents would not be able to argue with. I had to make my case. I wanted to be a lawyer as a kid because I loved that feeling of making an argument really well. And that's a skill, and it came in handy in writing this book. I wanted the arguments to be persuasive and airtight. But man, oh man, it's a lot of work. And I also wrote later in chapter 30, I think, which is called Foes to Friends, Working with the Obstacles to Healing. I wrote about how my diagnosable hypomania, which is a mild form of bipolar, the hypomania part is a little boy's mind in overdrive, trying to keep up and assert some kind of control trying to get a navigation system over a vehicle that's constantly going out of control, just so it doesn't go into the ditch. And the depression part, which inevitably follows, is a circuit breaker. The fuse box blows, and both of them give me gifts. On the one hand, excitement, creative flow, brilliance, which helps me when I'm writing songs. Non-linear thinking. It means I'm very good at communicating when there are conflicts, better than most people, I would say, when I'm conscious. And in terms of the depression, well, I get to take a rest. My body is taking care of itself, recuperating. But they're both very extreme modes. It's like I can only be in fourth gear because I don't have a first gear. And that comes from that overworked stress apparatus and intellectual system and cerebral cortex and whatever else is going on up there. So, it's consequential. And the nice thing is that at this point in the healing process, it's really mainly just a matter of reminding myself I don't have to work so hard all the time. And I find that with my parents, the less hard I work, the quicker we work through those difficult moments. Because when I start acting like a little kid, they understandably get their backs up because they're looking at a 47. I'll be 47 a week from yesterday. And so they're looking at a man who's almost 50 years old, who's coming at them with the energy of a desperate to be loved, desperate to be understood 3-year-old. That's kind of off-putting. And it triggers their guilt reflexes, and they don't want to be made to feel guilty. They felt guilty enough, which is not my fault. It's their guilt. But there's a part of me that uses that, my grievances, right? And it knows that it can get them to give me, if I can't get the whole cake, at least I can get crumbs. And looking for reparations, looking to redeem the past. The way you redeem the past is not by trying to change it. It's never going to change. You redeem it by just accepting it for what it is, and you just allow it to be, and it lets you be. So I am never done with this, apparently, and maybe I'll be able to look back 2 years from now and say, hey, I haven't had a hissy fit with my father in 6 months. Wow, I must be making progress. But I think you only realize these things in retrospect. And I forget who it was, some political activist, Amilcar Cabral, who was an African freedom fighter. I think he said, claim no easy victories, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. And that was in the context of political activism. I think it's true in the context of healing too. I mean, don't downplay your victories either, claim them, but don't assume you're past anything, because that's the pride that comes before a fall, for me at least.
Yeah, the facts of our life will never change, right? How we relate to those facts, how we do the healing in the present, I think that's the important thing. And we don't necessarily have to go mend the past, fix the things that come from the past. The past doesn't exist anymore. But what can we do in the present? But like you said, the shadow of the past shows up in subtle ways, in unexpected ways. And it sounds like you've done a lot of work. You're so aware and honest about your own patterns. And it's just incredible to hear your explanation and analysis of this relationship and how mature you are about it now. Vulnerably admitting that, yes, part of you sometimes still wants that validation, but it is up to you. You have this agency and responsibility. You're not giving your power away to them for them to change. And, you can still live your life and enjoy your life, right?
More and more and more. And I've had to find my own way there. I mean, most of the world can take in Dr. Gabor Mate's teachings and bring it into their lives and be nourished by it and apply the lessons and just there's just a lot of gold in it. He's brilliant. He's passionate. He loves knowledge and truth, and he cares about people, and he has a lot of compassion. I have, you could call it an allergy. You could call it, I'm celiac when it comes to his, it's like, to his teachings, like I can't digest it. I'm inoculated against it. It's not good for me to try and use his way of looking at things too much to navigate my own path, because that defeats the entire purpose. That doesn't mean I want to resist it or rebel against it. that's knee-jerk reactivity, and that's no more authentic than blind obedience or obsequiousness. But it's meant that I have to keep moving. I have to keep looking for what feels authentic. And that's changed over time. So I've been through a lot of different modalities, including some time in the psychedelic world adjacent to him. But eventually I had to leave that behind too, because I started to want to really integrate my transformations and my insights in my own language, in my own waking state of mind. And I find that the validation I'm seeking, it comes when I'm not looking for it. It's the most cliched thing in the world. But in writing this book with my father, the number of times he has looked at me and said, Daniel, I couldn't do this without you. And he's now saying that in front of crowds of people and on podcasts. And it's nice. It's nice. I won't pretend that it doesn't help. But you know what it is? It's not like,
maybe it's not enough. I was going to say, like, it's nice, but I would say it's not enough. If I were you, that's how I would feel.
Well, I think I agree with you that it's not enough, but I mean it in a more positive sense. Because if it was enough, then I would have no inner resources of my own. I'd be depending on it, and it would never last because I'd need the next hit of it, right? Because he says it once, so I got to hear it again. It's like if someone says, I love you once, it's not going to last you the whole thing. A relationship, the fact that it's not enough means that what else is required if it's not enough? It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. What makes it sufficient is that I've got my own supply of self-esteem. So it's more like when he says that stuff, it fits. It's harmonized with how I see myself, and it's validating. And something in me relaxes. I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. Something is aligned. And when he doesn't say that, I feel a little bit of out of alignment. The question is, am I going to let that throw me and question myself and start fighting back like a little kid? Or am I going to examine, okay, what in me needs to be tended to myself? Who else can I get it from? Can I call a friend and be like, hey, I'm just checking in, Am I my own person? Did I contribute something unique to this? And there's plenty of other people in the world who I can reliably count on to give me what I crave, want, need, because they love me and they're not dealing with all this guilt stuff. And they're also not busy giving 4 interviews a day and nervous about putting this book out. So the exclusive reliance on my parents is another holdover from childhood, that I can only get it from them. That's not their job anymore. It's nice when it comes. And I can, in a way, I can send a memo back in time to the young me and say, hey, this is going to happen at some point. Relax, it's good. And I know it hurts, right? I know it hurts right now that it's not happening. So that's nice. I'm just not going to pretend that, oh, I'm above that. I'm stoic and it doesn't matter what anyone thinks of me. Of course it does. But it's not the only thing that matters. And if it's the only thing that matters, then I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I agree with that. That is such an important point that I want to really highlight that for the listener, not relying solely on that one resource, generating your own resource, creating your own support system, seeing yourself in the world for what you have done, how far you've come to get that confirmation for who you truly are. And I think if we are going to that, it's like going to an empty what is this called when you get water from the ground?
The well.
From an empty. It wasn't there from the beginning.
This is literally the metaphor I use in the Hello Again workshop. I say it's called going back to the well over and over again.
Yeah. It's
expecting
like
the water
there.
to be there.
Yeah,
That's not right.
There. It's not there. You have to change where you get your supply from. At some point in life, we have to grow up and say, you know what? Enough is enough. I accept the facts of my life. This was available in this relationship. And what can I do with that? Can I grieve and mourn and make peace with it and move on and cultivate other resources because it's abundant. It's out there. And it's huge work. It is the work, I think. It hurts me to know that we put our children through that entire journey by parenting from our unconscious wounding. And if only we can change that, our children don't have to work so hard to connect to their authentic self. If we can only see them for who they are, they don't have to seek themselves when they're adults.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm taking an acting class right now here in New York, and this is the first time I've acted in 25 years. I became a musical theater writer, so I get to write the lines and the songs and the lyrics that the actors sing, which give me a lot of control. Being an actor, you don't have that it's a different kind of thing, right? You're much more vulnerable in a way. And I was put in an improvised scene last night with another actor who I had never met. And we were given this kind of absurd circumstance in which it turns out that I have a 19-year-old son that I've never met from some fling I had when I was, in my 20s. And I'm in the middle of doing something important at home, and he comes in, and I have to manage, I have to keep doing the activity, but at the same time, here's my son. And this whole ridiculous scene ensued, but it was very moving for me because at a certain point, he was trying to get my attention. He was acting out. He was acting like a hurt little kid. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't have the language to say that. And the acting teacher, the coach, said, he gave me my line. He said, Daniel, just say, I don't know how to be right now. And the minute I said that, I dropped into being present and just sitting with the discomfort of it, but also the love that was there and just the honesty, and especially, talking to a 19-year-old, but even talking to a 9-year-old. Wow, you're really struggling. In this moment, I don't know how to help you, which is modeling vulnerability and authenticity, not pretending to have something you don't, not playing some role, which is what the child really craves. They want to know you, which doesn't mean you dump all your angst on them. You do have to perform the role of parent sometimes. But just the physical experience for me of, first of all, just all of a sudden being plunged into a fathering role felt really good. I was like, oh, I like this. I might want to do this, which I knew I might want to do it, but it was an experience of it. It was very beautiful. But also just the freedom to say, son, I don't know who to be right now. I'm torn. Was so lovely. And in that moment, I was able to access curiosity about him. That's the other thing that can be wounding, is when your parents think they know who you are. It means they're not curious. You're not a mystery to them. Your children should be mysteries to you. They should be wonders to you. They're wondrous little mysteries. I mean, where did they come from anyway? Who is this little space creature, But then parents need their kids to be a certain way. They treat them as if they are that. And the child, their options get more and more limited. And I guess sometimes that comes from an attachment insecurity in the parent, because if the child is truly a mystery and truly separate from me, then they're not mine and I don't get to hold on to them forever. And they're not there to fill my needs. But that just happens to be the truth. I mean, one of you is going to die first. Someday they're going to leave. It's not forever. You have a function to fill, and there's joy in that. But if you're using the parenting relationship to extract something from your children, they're going to experience you as vampires. And that's an image that I've sometimes had about being consumed in the relationship. And but then I've also had experiences where my parents truly see me and their eyes go wide and they're like, wow, who are you? And that's so much more fulfilling than we know who you are.
I give this exercise to my clients. I work with parents, and I always give this exercise to them. First, I ask them, you describe your child to me. Like, who is your child? Like, your 4-year-old is giving you a hard time, your 10-year-old, your 12-year-old. And then, they give a little description. And then I ask them to either write down in front of me or go home and observe their child for a whole week with the eyes of an investigator, a researcher, a scientist, a therapist, someone who, not the parent, and try to discover who your child is and jot down traits and characteristics and things that you discover about your child every day, and bring that to our next session. And every time there is resistance, oh, you're telling me, I know my kid. I'm like, no, please, this is an exercise. We're going to do it. But when they come back, Daniel, they're like, thank you so much. You opened my eyes. In most cases, I see my child differently. Wow, I didn't know he had a sense of humor. I didn't know he could be this way. I see him under a different light. And I'm like, that is the whole point of this exercise. You're too close. You have a snapshot in your head that this is how your kid should be. And you're missing the whole experience of enjoying the mystery that they are.
That you're ripping yourself off. And imagine what it's like for the child. The minute someone doesn't know you and wants to know you, what's the first thing they're going to do? what activity will they automatically engage in?
Say it again. The moment
Well, so
somebody
when
doesn't
you
know
want,
me.
well, let me flip it around. When you really want to know something and you know that you don't know it, but you really are drawn to it and you want to know it, what activities, what verbs would you use to describe the natural actions that you would engage in just naturally?
I would be curious. I would try to learn.
How?
Yeah.
How would you learn? Through what method?
Observing, asking
Yes.
questions.
And
I think
then after you ask the questions, what would you do?
what would I do? I would
If you wanted,
process it.
no, but there's a very obvious one that's so obvious
Oh man,
that
I'm failing this course.
it's totally no. You're demonstrating something.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a trick question.
No.
If I ask a question and I genuinely want to know the answer, what do I need to do right after I ask the question?
Yeah, you have to listen. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You actually have to actively listen, not just turn your hearing aid on and let it come at you like Charlie Brown's teacher, like wah, 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 but actually actively listen. And the minute a child is actively listened to, that is the nectar of the gods.
Yeah.
That is miraculous. It is wonderful. It stimulates all kinds of growth. And I think my dad's told me once that he always had a hard time playing with me. And then once he smoked some pot one time and I relaxed with him. And that must have been because he was looking at me with something like wonder, curiosity, interest, not knowing me. Now, the fact that it took a psychoactive substance to get there is indicative of something. And you wouldn't want to necessarily rely on that. But clearly, it's a very powerful thing. It's true with adults, too. The minute you actually listen to someone who needs to be heard, something transforms. It's all the more true for kids. So that's a brilliant exercise you're giving people.
And you know what? I think the more we live with a person, the more intimate, quote unquote, we become, or cohabitate a space, let's say, we think we know them. But I think that's the trouble. We always have to come from this beginner's mind, right? That this person is a mystery to me. What else can I learn about this person? Because your child at age 4 is a different person. At age 10, you're going to discover completely new, layers to them. When your child is 14, you're going to discover completely other layers to their person. Yeah, the core essence of their authentic self is the same, but you can't just lose sight of the fact. I want this mystery to be alive always, looking at our kids or at our loved ones, at our important relationship with beginner's eyes and curiosity and openness, instead of saying, oh, I know my kid, oh, I know my husband, he's always been like that, or she would, I think
if you don't inspect what you get, you'll get what you expect.
Oh, good.
I stole that from I heard that like 20 years ago. I thought that was so great. I've stored that away. I think the greatest lyric of all time might be Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell. I did an episode actually of it on my YouTube channel, Lyrics to Go, where I break down lyrics. I do Metallica, Wu-Tang Clan, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Talking Heads, Bjork, everybody. Stephen Sondheim in the musical theater world. And but Both Sides Now, what is it about? I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's cloud illusions, I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. And then she generalizes to love and then all the way out to life. But that's true with anything. And even if we look at it 2 ways, well, that's just 2 ways. And it's a skill that you have to practice being comfortable in the unknown. And I think so many things were known in my household that I missed out on the beauty of the unknown. And it's a beautiful thing to be discovering more and more as I get older, which is, I think, part of what Bob Dylan meant when he said, I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now.
Wow. So wonderful. When I started my practice, working with parents 14 years ago, before that, I was working with kids. And then I realized that it's the parents who ruin the kids, right? So let me help the parents. So when in the first few years, I would actively do this thing. I would go to Home Depot, which is a store like, I don't know if you have the same in Canada, but
Of
it's
course,
just,
where are you located?
I'm in New Jersey. I'm in
I'm
Princeton.
in I'm in Brooklyn.
We should meet. We should meet.
We should, absolutely.
We should have done this live, not live, like in person.
We'll meet on Staten Island.
Yeah, sounds good. So what I would go to Home Depot, buy different seeds. Obviously, they come in a packet and it's written, right? Magnolia or strawberry, carrot. So I would buy lots of seeds, depackage them at home, and then I would put them in small packets that I had, like white packets, and I would write on them seeds of love. And so when I had a workshop, lots of parents would come to my workshop. I would give each parent a packet of seeds. And I would say, that was my shtick for many years. I would say, your children are like seeds. I'm giving you seeds. You don't even know what they are, right? What seeds you're getting in this packet. Why don't you go home, plant, and watch it grow? Just nurture the seed. One day it will grow. It might give you fruit. It might blossom. It may just be a foliage plant. Can you accept what you got? Because everybody here, I would say, got different seeds. And I would make sure that everybody got a different seed. And I would always wonder, did they plant? Like, what happened? Years later, I met a woman in a different town in New Jersey. She approached me. She said, "Hey, Anna, do you remember me? I'm Donna." I'm like, "Yeah, of course. Hi, how are you?" She said, "Remember you gave us packets of seeds?" I'm like, "Yes." She's like, "I know," she says, "it's a bush. I'm growing it. It's near my, next to my house. And it's this." And I'm like, wow. So people really did take that seriously. And it's so true, right? Like, you don't know what the package is you're getting. Can you just nurture and grow?
And then all there is for you to do is just fulfill the function of gardener. Like, it's not about teaching the seeds something or like stamping the seeds with your autograph or something like that. As you're speaking, I'm considering that maybe the ultimate act of love is to let something be itself.
Wow, so true.
Grant it the right to be what it is. And again, I've never had kids, but I imagine that must be the hardest thing in the world to do.
I think you'll be an amazing dad. I'm sorry to jump in, but I think anybody who can sit and speak like that with so much deep reflection and insight, and I think you're going to make an amazing dad.
Thank you.
I definitely give you permission. Not that you need my permission. I give you my blessing, so to speak. But you know what? I had a traumatic childhood. I don't talk about it a lot because I'm so past my past and my childhood. I'm your age, almost 50. So what if I had a traumatic childhood? But here is one thing.
Don't say that around my dad. Jeez.
Yeah. No. So here's what I'm gonna make a distinction. I thought about this a lot. I thought about how come some people have a hard time with accepting or finding themselves and doing this growth thing and this parenting thing. And some people, it's not as hard. It is hard. Like, don't get me wrong. It is hard for me too. But here is what I learned. Parents can damage their children in many ways. But I think, and we can experience different kinds of traumas. I've been homeless. I had no food to eat. I experienced a severe earthquake. I lost everything, including my mom. Like, I've been through hell, right? If I tell my story, people cry. But what was not done to me is exactly what you're describing. I was seen for who I was, even in the midst of chaos and destruction and no conditions. My dad saw me for who I was and so celebrated my authentic self and never squashed it or wanted me to be someone different. I had that growing up. And I know that it gives me this solid foundation and I can overcome just about anything.
Well, that speaks to my father's definition of trauma, right? Because trauma is not what the external events that happen to you. It's what happens inside of you. And there are people who who grow up under war and genocide, and they come out of it not with the kind of traumatic wounds that my father did, which is another reason that I'm not completely satisfied by the explanation that, like, there must have been something else. And I knew my grandmother. And I know what a stern, disapproving, serious, wounded person she was. She was a wonderful woman, wise, funny, really resilient. But I've wondered later in life, age 3, age 10, age 17, I know little glimpses of what my dad went through with his parents. Clearly, you went through some horrible things too. And they left, other things left their mark on you. But if you had the experience of being seen and heard for who you were, that is worth a lot.
That is worth a lot. And I think that's the biggest factor. I talked to someone yesterday and I said, how do you think parents damage their kids? She said, oh, you're talking, my parents criticized me. Like I was never good enough. They compared me to different people, including my siblings. Like they couldn't see me for who I was, the things that we're talking about today. And she had a quote unquote decent childhood. But you see how hard it is for that person than for me. Whereas in our society, most people are like, oh my gosh, Anna, the things that you endured and suffered, it must have been so hard. I'm like, trust me. Like, no, I know my footing in this world. Like, I know who I am. I think I didn't know that then, but I know now that, wow, that's a gift that my dad gave me. That's a big gift. Not that he like aced it or anything, but no one does. But I think that's the biggest factor. That's the biggest factor.
Yeah, it clearly is. I mean, I should say what my father went through in terms of being handed to a stranger on the street and didn't see his parents, his mother, for 6 weeks. That is probably inexorably a deep traumatic wound, unless you're living in a social support network that is so calm and loving and it's the tribe and all that. But this is not that. This is war and deprivation and stress and all that. So I don't at all want to make frivolous what he went through. I can't imagine it. I literally can't imagine it. And clearly our wounds come from multiple sources. And the main thing is, how do we experience those events and what meaning do we make from them? And if you had a parent who had the wherewithal and the awareness to affirm who you were and accept your range of emotions for what they were, even among all of that tumult and chaos and catastrophe, then your self was able to develop some kind of stability and security under those circumstances, which is the definition of resilience.
I think I want to make an addition. The emotions part wasn't always there because everybody else was suffering and going through the experience. It was a global, massive earthquake. I think I had to sort out a lot of the emotional part on my own. But I would say even with that, just because he honors who I was with my quirkiness, craziness, artistic, creative endeavors, my expressions. I used to wear, like in high school, this uniform to school, like a workman's uniform. And I would do crazy things, right? As a young teen girl, like I was very creative, artistic, and he loved that. They never made fun of it. So even though he didn't give me the full package as a parent, like he couldn't be there emotionally for me when he was also going through a lot. But he still gave me enough to sustain me. Enough of who I was honored.
And I don't want to make it sound like I got nothing good from my parents. I got lots good from my parents.
Yeah.
I got intellectual play and engagement and fun and joking and sometimes physical play with my father. And my mother and I had some very connected times, The difficulty was that it was inconsistent and that it was sometimes operationalized, which is a big fancy word. But what I mean by that is, so take my talent, for instance. I've had perfect pitch since I was 5, or since I was born, I guess. And my parents noticed that at age 3 or 4, I would stand at the piano, which was taller than me, and play along to Beatles songs before I knew any of the notes. I could just harmonize. And my talent was celebrated, but it was either in relationship with my parents or maybe my grandparents and I don't know where. This is still something that will, I'm sure, make itself clearer to me as I go deeper into my own healing. I felt like I lost ownership of my own talent. I didn't quite know what it was for. It became commandeered by survival needs, by approval needs, as opposed to following my own creative gut instinct. There must have been some disapproval for when I veered from, say, the Suzuki method or playing classical music. My father's the world's most famous classical music addict. He's talked about that, a
He's
lot,
talked
right?
about that a lot. I know.
So I can just imagine, again, it stands to reason if I extrapolate, imagining little me at the piano competing with Beethoven or Mahler in the other room, making up my own little melodies, which are based on, I don't know, pop music or whatever else, or just my own quirky whatevers. And him coming into the kitchen and not being able to sink into or appreciate or love or wonder about or have the same reaction to, it wasn't his home base. His home base was the intent. It was Bartok, clanging, dissonant, angry, dramatic music. And when he was listening to it, he didn't want to be disturbed. So all of a sudden, my music is in competition with what he loves. Well, that taints my relationship to music thereafter, which creates an ambivalence towards having my talent acknowledged in the world. Because what are they acknowledging it for? And then, when I'm 17, I decide to learn to play the guitar, partly because I love rock music and I want to learn to play the guitar, partly because I want to impress girls around the campfire. And then whenever I'm playing guitar, I'm playing the Indigo Girls or Ani DeFranco or whatever, there is a part of me that's using it to get something. And there's something there's something inauthentic about that. And I know it. I feel fraudulent. So when I'm playing, there's a part of me that's embarrassed, even if people are really enjoying it. When I was 25, I recorded an album. I mentioned one of the songs from it earlier. I didn't put it out. I mean, I got 500 copies made. I did a few shows, but I was just so sheepish about it. It's like, look at me, don't look at me. Look at me, don't look at me. Pay attention to me, but pay the right kind of attention to me. And that dynamic has been coming out with the release of this book too. It's like, oh, they're going to be paying attention to me, but they're not paying attention to what makes me unique and special and all this. So all of that, it's like, even when the strengths are celebrated,
it's still through their lens. It's still through their filter.
That's right. And ultimately, and my dad talks about the tension between attachment and authenticity. We talk about it in the book. Authenticity means finally owning, really having ownership and authorship and authority over. Authenticity, author, authority all come from the same root, auto, the self, in the Greek derivation. And so that's something that needs to be recovered over the course of the lifespan, and the nice thing about that is every bit of it that I grow in is a nice surprise. It's like, oh, I didn't know this could be so nice and relaxing. It's like I get to unwind, unspool this tightly wound ball of thread throughout the rest of my life. And is there some grief and regret that I didn't get to have it earlier? Yeah. Might I be a father right now or be in a stable relationship if I didn't have these wounds? It's plausible. I'm never going to get that chance back, ever. So just trying to spiritually bypass that and say, oh, well, Om Shanti, this is my karma or whatever. Well, maybe there's some things to feel. Maybe there's some anger. Maybe there's some shaking your fist at God for a second. Even the greatest Old Testament heroes wrestled with their fate, wrestled with the pain in the world. Literally, Jacob wrestled with God, right? Or with the angel. So we can't skip over the sadness, the grief, the anger. But when we do engage with them, I think on the other side of it, there's a freedom and a true acceptance of our limitless possibilities and our limitations as well. Again, the paradox of life, allowing both things to be true at once.
Yeah. That's why, I called my practice, the podcast, everything, authentic parenting. Like in the beginning, I didn't even know how important or meaningful that word was for me. I've grown into it, but when I was trying to name my practice, and the podcast is 7 years old, but my practice is more when I got the domain and things like that, I was thinking, and my main thing was, again, I was coming from my own upbringing, right? Because my dad didn't damage my authentic self. And I knew that's an important aspect of parenting. And I wasn't even a parent myself yet. But I knew that's an important aspect. Like, our children come into this world whole, complete, and authentic. Can we do our own work, our own healing, or can we see our children for who they are because that's authentic parenting. But you, in order to do that, you have to do your own work, connect to your own authentic self that was damaged growing up, so that you can raise this authentic human being. And I said, wow, that's authentic parenting. I'm going to call this thing authentic parenting.
That's great. And authenticity isn't just like healing. It's not a point on a map. It's a direction. It's an energy. It's a current that you either row with or you row against. How old are your kids now?
I have only one. I didn't want to have more to damage them more. Like with my baggage, I can only have capacity for one.
Quit while you're ahead. So how old is the child?
She's 14.
14, okay.
And she's completely different from me, right? And I think, like, I want to give myself credit, because as parents, we don't always do that. I want to boast about my parenting skills or whatever. But I think I'm succeeding in that I am able to see her in her own right, in her own light, as her own person, honor and celebrate and listen to her feelings and just give her space to grow and mature. And I'm always curious and wondrous. Sometimes I look at her and I'm like, who is this person? And she looks at me, she catches me, she goes, what, Mom? I'm like, I don't know. I just love looking at you, like discovering who you are. She's like, Mom, I'm your daughter. I'm the same person as I was yesterday. I'm like, no, like today I look at you differently. I don't want to lose touch with that sense of wonder, discovery. And I hope I think I am succeeding in that. I want to give myself credit, because I've done a lot of work on myself, but I also know the value of it. And I know that's a big damaging factor for a lot of kids.
And you also don't want to get into a paranoid state where you're like, oh my God, did I damage them today? Because no kid wants to be their parents' fault. No kid wants to be the result of their parents' screw ups and the compulsive guilt and obsessiveness. You know, you could read too many parenting manuals or listen to too many lectures by a certain Canadian doctor about how how trauma works. I mean, even if my dad says over and over again, guilt and blame are unscientific and cruel and inappropriate, if I can imagine someone getting overzealous about doing it perfectly, and then when you do that, you're just making it all about you again. You're just, you're reinforcing the kind of self-absorption rather than just letting it be and trusting that your child has resources too.
And yes, and trusting that your child, it's just like that plant, is gonna blossom and be a functioning, normal, I don't know what terms to use, adult in this world. That's the trust nature. Like, I don't have to manipulate her growth. It's not up to me.
How many trees have you seen that didn't grow straight, but they turned into the most beautiful, unique thing? You go into the forest sometimes, at least where I'm from in British Columbia, and there are these arbutus trees that grow on the West Coast. And some of them, they grow on cliff sides, and one will sort of go up and then like an L shape or a J, and then back up like a total zigzag. And one point of view, that's a deformed tree. And the other, but from, I think, a saner point of view, it's a miracle, and it's beautiful and it's unique, and life finds a way if we don't interfere with it. Any good gardener will tell you that. So in fact, our chapter about how the parenting instinct is eroded in the society, the title of it, which was one of my little bon mots, is Horticulture on the Moon. Because we use the gardening metaphor. There was a parenting expert, quote unquote, who wrote a book about parenting, who said that, parenting can be isolating and lonely and incredibly stressful. And we said, yes, it can in this society, but that's all context. Trying to grow a rose bush on the moon, horticulture on the moon, would no doubtless be a frustrating and fruitless endeavor, but that tells you nothing about gardening. It tells you about the lack of fit between the endeavor and the environment.
Yeah. I think if we can only relinquish our agendas for our kids, let go of control, and I used to make t-shirts in the beginning of my work with parents. And one of them was for a little, like a, 1-year-old, it said, watch me grow. Just watch me grow, right? Don't interfere with my growth. Just watch me grow. I'll blossom and bloom for you.
Well, and if too many weeds come in, or parasites or deer, be there with a shotgun and get them out of, watch me grow and make and
Protect me.
Put up a little fence, do what needs to be done, but be discerning, be ready to replant me when the pot gets too small, put me in the ground and trust the earth to take care of me from then on. It's such a good metaphor, actually.
It is. Not that the little prince who kept the rose under that glass, right? That's not a natural environment.
That's right. Well, because he wanted to keep her. He wanted to.
Yeah.
He wanted her to stay exactly the way she was, and he didn't want her to die. But by doing that, he was killing her.
It's just like we can draw parallels towards with parenting. It's like we have good intentions, but wow, this is an incredible conversation. I really love this. The pathways that we covered and the places that we went. I want to give you an opportunity to tell the listener, who is Daniel? And when you look back at your childhood, as I said, core essence doesn't change, right? We acquire new layers and things like that. But I can see my child is the same person as she was like when she was 4. I am the same person, for God's sake. I even have the same haircut when I was like 5 years old and things. So who were you as a kid and who are you now?
Well, when you ask that question, it's so funny, but the first thing that came to mind is a scene from the new Beavis and Butthead movie, of all things, which just came out. And in this movie, they travel through a wormhole in space from the 90s, where they originated, to 2022. And there's all kinds of technology they're not familiar with and lingo they're not familiar with. And Beavis gets his hands on an iPhone. And so he thinks that Siri is like a woman, a chick, and they're always trying to score with chicks. And really they're attachment hungry, right? And he starts talking to her and confiding in her. And at one point he says his own name and she says, "I don't understand, Beavis." And he goes, yeah, neither do I sometimes. Who am I anyway? He gets all vulnerable with this automated algorithm. It's very sweet. So who is Daniel? Well, I usually start with I'm a musical theater writer. Before that, I'm a Western Canadian Jewish kid from Vancouver who feels more at home in New York than the West Coast of Canada, usually. I did the International Baccalaureate program in high school. I have a useless psychology degree from McGill, which I basically dropped out of with a nervous breakdown because I was so unfulfilled there. And there was such a gap between my extracurricular activities, theater and music, and the thing I had chosen to study, where I was basically just following in my dad's footsteps by default. And it took me until my late 20s to realize, no, music and theater is the center of me. And in fact, I could combine the two into musical theater. And I wasn't a musical theater fan or a kid who grew up on musicals, but it turned out to be a very productive synthesis. And so I've been doing that since then. I've had musicals produced in lots of different places, not so much New York, but I had a musical produced in Denmark a few years ago, Florida, and I have a lot of musicals in development. I'm writing a musical based on the Russell Banks novel, The Sweet Hereafter, which was made into a Canadian film. I write musicals about sad, traumatic things that I try to find the sweetness in and the lightness. That seems to be something I'm drawn to. My first musical was based on Kafka's Metamorphosis. So I wrote a sequel to Hansel and Gretel, a family show, but that show is about multi-generational trauma. And we were about to open it in Seattle when COVID hit, called Hansel and Gretel and Heidi and Gunther. And people can find out more about my musicals at my website, danielmaté.com. And there's a YouTube channel where a lot of my songs are there, performed by me and other people. I'm the eldest of 3 kids. I'm a mental chiropractor, which is my own designation. I run this Walk with Daniel service, which is walkwithdaniel.com, and people can go there and read more about that. But someone once said to me, you're not like your father. You're not a therapist. I said, thank you very much. He said, you're a mental chiropractor. I said, that is what I am, because I like to get in there and make quick adjustments. Did I already talk about this in this interview?
No. I was going to ask you. I have it in my notes, but I'm glad you are bringing this up because I'm really curious about that. It's a good term. I like that.
Yeah, well, it fits what I'm interested in. Like my dad's gift is, well, one of them is he has many gifts. One of them is synthesizing a lot of different information, popularizing difficult science, being an advocate for the marginalized, but he's also just really gifted at sitting with people in their deepest trauma very patiently and helping guide them with a real kind of deep compassion.
It was sorry. It was apparent in the wisdom of trauma. There were a few scenes where you could really get that sense, and it's really compelling to watch that.
It is. Sometimes it can be a bit hypnotic, which I worry about, because you want people to be really answering for themselves and not being suggestible. And there are times when I've seen him slip into a kind of rote autopilot. Sometimes when we work together with people in our Hello Again workshop, it's not a criticism of him. Any skill has its pitfalls, you know? So I'll sometimes say to him, hey, Dad, this person doesn't need to go all the way down that rabbit hole right now. That's not what is needed in this moment, you know? But when he's conscious, which is most of the time, he's very, very skillful at leading people into those dark places and being with them. And I've seen him do that in the context of ayahuasca integration and all kinds of other things. That's not my thing. I just don't have the patience for that. It's not that I don't have the compassion or the empathy, but I'm always thinking, okay, cool. All that happened. Let's take that for granted. The trauma is there. I'm not going to minimize it or tell someone to get over it. But I'm interested, once we get through that, and sometimes people have to go there, but then the question is, what do you want right now? What's your intention right now? And what would serve you in that intention? Do you need more insight into your past, or do you need more insight into your present, how you're currently looking at your situation? And I seem to be quite gifted or skilled or adept at helping people identify what it is that has them stuck right now. Because someone can be stuck in a situation and then they can go into themselves and realize, oh, wow, I was traumatized at age 3. My parents divorced. I didn't have anyone to talk to. I was abused. Okay, well, then you come back to the present moment. What now? It might feel good to, you know what, but you're still dealing with the same situation with the same mind, the same conscious mind that you've developed. And it's my observation, and this, I might be wrong, but I think that the mind kind of gets a bad rap in the psycho-spiritual world, at least in the spiritual world. Because what's the point of meditation, or what's the method of meditation? You sit there and you notice the mind, but you ignore it. You don't listen to its contents. You let it pass you by. And you just cultivate a present moment awareness of the breath or the candle or the mantra or whatever else you're focusing on. That's a good muscle to build. But I think we say that, you know, if healing is, or if the emotions are the materials of healing, the mind is the territory to be navigated. You got to deal with your mind at some point, because your mind is even framing your whole spiritual approach, the way you're looking at your spiritual approach, your beliefs about it, your assumptions, your prejudices, your likes, your dislikes, the ways in which you might make it into an identity, all of these things. So in any situation, I've perceived that the mind is like a spine, which is where the chiropractor thing comes from. It's made of constituent parts, nerves, bones, ligaments, fascia, connected to the rest of the body. And what are the component parts? What are the vertebrae? Well, you've got intentions, some of which are explicit and some of which are implicit. Most of the time, we don't even know what our intention really is. If you want to know what your intention is, look at the results. You always win the game you're really playing. That's one way of looking at it. So, you know, if I'm getting more conflict in my life and I say, oh, but I really want peace, maybe. But as long as you insist on that, you may not get very far. So there's that. There's our explicit and implicit intentions. There's our values, our moral values, our standards, our ideals, our expectations, our prejudices, our associations, our emotions, our thoughts, our judgments. I mean, there's a million different components. When those things are working together in alignment, it's like a chord of, it's like notes that form a chord that fits with the music. It's harmonized. When it doesn't, it's dissonant. Now, sometimes dissonant chords can be cool, but if it's out of alignment, like a spine, then we're going to get nerve pain over here in my middle finger on the right hand, or in my knee, or I'm going to have a backache, or I'm going to have a headache, or I'm going to be in a bad mood. Something in the spine is out of alignment. You go see a good chiropractor or a good practitioner of any kind, a good acupuncturist, any kind of interventionist treatment where the point is we're going to get in there right now and make an adjustment. And they locate it, they identify it, they pinpoint it, and they touch it, or they manipulate it. And all of a sudden there's relief. That's what I do. I'm not so interested in depth. I'm interested in precision. And so when my dad and I work together in these workshops, we have very complementary approaches, quite different. And so often I'll let him kind of loosen people up and open themselves up to their own emotions. And then I'll say, okay, good. So now, what do you actually want in this relationship? Then we can do the adjustment because the muscles are loose. So I do that with him, but I also do it in my own practice, which I call Walk with Daniel, walkwithdaniel.com. And the idea is simply I take walks with people in person, if they live in the tri-state area, or if I happen to be in their city, or most often by phone or Zoom audio. They walk where I am. I walk where I am. Why walking? Well, because being outdoors is good for the brain and the body. You're using both hemispheres when you're swinging your arms and moving your legs. You're literally changing your point of view every step. Even if you come back around to the same spot you started, it'll be a different time of day, different lighting, different cloud patterns. So you're breaking up your normal fixed way of seeing it, which if you want to get unstuck, you have to allow the strong probability that it's your way of seeing it that's keeping you stuck, not the situation. So yeah, it's kind of a forensic investigation and intervention, but it's fun. It's not like I don't do it if someone doesn't give me consent. Just like if I walked up to someone on the subway and gave them an unasked for massage, they'd be right to call the cops on me and charge me with harassment. But if someone says, hey, can you crack my spine? That's a violent thing, but it's welcomed, So I'm as gentle or as forceful or as fierce as the situation demands for, and always in collaboration with the person. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And there's another way in which I can distinguish myself from my father, not by fighting him, but by saying, I have my own way of contributing to people. And I like that. And it gets me up from the piano or the writing pad, and it gets me out of my own self-absorbed wormhole and to focus on somebody else. And I just love the moment when something clicks for someone. You can almost even hear it. So they drop in and they get free and they get clear, and all of a sudden they see the situation with a kind of new insight. And what happens is, like what I say on my website, is when your mind is aligned, you just work. Meaning that your best qualities, which go AWOL the minute you're stuck, your flexibility, your creativity, your suppleness, your resilience, your compassion, all those things go out the window when we're stuck. They get, compressed. But the minute we get unstuck, they come back online, and all of a sudden we don't need someone's advice to tell us what to do, because we can, okay, there you go. It's simpler than I thought. And I'm really interested in not being reductive, but getting to the nut of what is it right now that's keeping you stuck. And maybe that doesn't solve your big, your big capital I issues. So I don't help people with their big capital I issues. But if you have a small victory, say with your father, you're going to see your father next week, and it's going to go a certain way, and you don't want it to go that way because it always goes that way. But you can't imagine it going a different way. And you've tried a million things and it always goes that way. Well, if you can have it not going that way once, that might soften up your bigger daddy issues, capital daddy issues, because all of a sudden it's not so stuck. It's not so set in stone. So that's my approach. That's what I like to do with people.
Sounds great. I like that. What's your horoscope sign?
Well, my birthday is next Wednesday as of this recording. So September 28th, I'm a Libra.
You're a Libra. Yeah. I'm like, you sound a lot like me, but I'm a Gemini. Like, I think they're the same air sign, I believe, right? It's the same creativity, that the musical stuff. I'm not trying to compare myself to you, but it's like, yeah, very interesting. What are you working on now? In terms of not the book that you're writing with your dad, the Hello Again, but in terms of like Daniel projects.
Yeah, well, I think I'm working on, and in the sense of just ruminating on, expanding the Walk with Daniel thing to, could I teach the principles of mental chiropractic in like a group setting? Could I do a weekend workshop, say? Because, with the book coming out, my follower count is going up, and I don't know if I'm becoming an influencer, which is a word I hate, but I do have a bigger reach than I've ever had. And it might be a way I'd be interested to see what that's like. I would just be interested to see what that's like. Can I imagine a world in which I'm not the world's only mental chiropractor? Could I teach it, So that's one thing. And then my musical theater work continues. I'm hoping to have a developmental opportunity for my musical, The Sweet Hereafter, which would happen in the new year, but it's premature for me to announce that. But continue to try to network and get in touch with. It's a very difficult time for musical theater. I mean, recovering from COVID, the industry has been through so many changes. A lot of theaters are focusing, understandably and quite rightfully, on social justice issues, trying to redress past imbalances and stuff like that. But it doesn't make it necessarily easy to get new shows out there if they're not ticking certain boxes. So there's a lot of patience involved and following up and rewriting sometimes. So that's always an important piece. And then, yeah, I am doing it. Like, I'm going to Miami in a few weeks to talk to a trauma support group, which is weird to me. I'm not a trauma therapist, but I did co-write this book. I do know something about it. And clearly I have something to say. You and I have been talking for 90 minutes and I could go for another 60. So trying on this new role of being someone who speaks about this stuff. And I guess I'm developing my own identity in that as I go. I don't know how to describe.
Does it feel authentic? Does it feel yours? Or are you still like shadowing your dad, or this is his thing, you're just part of it?
No, the more I do it, the more it feels authentic. In theory, it's tricky because, he's so well known, but actually in practice, the minute I open my mouth, I think people can tell I'm not Gabor Jr.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so I feel like everything I say in this context is his work is a touchstone and our collaboration is very important to me. But as long as I'm getting the feedback that I'm making an original contribution and I don't hear myself just repeating his talking points, which I would never do anyway, because he can say them better than I can, then I feel like, no, it's like a new evolution. It's a new, is that when something branches out from a river, is that a tributary?
I mean, English is not my first language, so you're asking
anyway,
the wrong person.
It's a new branch. It's a new branch of the tree, and maybe it'll become its own tree. I don't know. I mean, I think part of my journey is to not define myself too rigidly, because I don't have a typical career. It's not like my dad, who became a teacher and then a doctor and then
an
addiction specialist and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's got a sort of a linear, an unexpected, but sort of linear progression. For me, I do all these different things. And
well, you're an artist, you're a creative. Yeah.
There is some core at the center of it. And that's what I keep inquiring into. What do all these things have in common? And I think on some level, it's me, right? But who is Beavis? Who is Daniel? What is my calling? I think it has something to do with clarifying things for people in a way that leaves them free and clear. That's the best I can come with it, so just there's an organizing principle underneath all of it, so that I don't need to feel like I have 4 different personalities. I have different functions in the world, but I have one core reason for being here. And I may change that over time. I might take a different cut at it, but I feel coherent more than I ever have in my life. And I'm doing more varied things than I ever have. So I think that speaks pretty well to the process.
You're bringing the gift of you to the world in whatever capacity that you can. I think that's the whole point.
Yeah. And I would wish that for everybody. And everyone has a different calling, a different gift to give. Yeah. And it may take multiple forms, including being a parent.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think this calling thing gets it's kind of tricky. I don't know if everybody has a calling.
Well, I mean the word in a very specific way. Yeah? I don't mean it the way most people usually use it.
Okay.
And I'm adopting this from some friends of mine who have led workshops on this topic. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. The way they frame calling and the way I do, it's not when people say my calling is to be a nurse, my calling is to be a healer. No, it's not. Those are roles. Those are functions. Those are expressions of your calling. Your calling is some mission you have for people, and people includes you. In fact, it starts with you, because if you're not living your calling, then you're just being a martyr or performing a role. So, as those shamans in Peru told my dad, if you're not healing your own trauma, you're not actually living your calling. You're just playing a role. And you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you're causing damage that you don't know. And so they fired him from his own retreat. That's a story we tell in the book.
I love that story. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm not living my calling, it starts with me, but it's not about me. So it's as if I'm here to cause or bear witness to a certain kind of transformation in the world. And that's the calling. And then the calling can take all kinds of forms, and it changes throughout the lifespan. So that's the way I'm framing it. Not like everyone has one job description. I hope not. If that was the case, then I'd be screwed. I'd be lost.
Wow. Interesting. Well, I have so many other questions and I want to know more, but I'm going to end it here. Maybe we can do round 2 and discuss some other topic.
I'd be happy to. This has been a very, very stimulating conversation.
Yeah, thank you for your presence, for your honesty, for your openness, for your reflections. It generated a lot of interesting thoughts in me, and I'll think about this conversation today and tomorrow, and until I record the next interview. I always think about the previous conversation. It percolates and marinates, and it's wonderful. Thank you for the gift of your presence today. I'm truly honored and happy that you were able to make time. I wanted to know, who is Daniel Maté? Who is Gabor Mate's eldest son? So I got to know you quite a bit, and I would have links for the listeners to all of the things that you're doing or providing. I think it's interesting.
And I should mention that my father and I are doing our Hello Again workshop at the Omega Institute in upstate New York at the end of October. And then we're doing it in Vancouver at the end of November. For the Omega one, you can live stream the Friday night public talk that we do, not the weekend workshop. Obviously, that's got to be more private. But if you can't join us in Rhinebeck, we hope that you will. You can tune in online to see our public comments. And what we do on those Friday nights is we each bring about 15 minutes of stuff to say, and we don't prep each other for it. So we don't know what the other one's going to say, and we talk each, and then we sit on stage and we have a conversation, and then we take questions. So it's always very stimulating.
I miss Omega. I used to go to Omega quite frequently, but since the COVID, I haven't been there. It's a wonderful place. And I did meet you. I've seen you in person in 2017. I came to a talk that your dad was giving at naira.org or something. When the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts.
Was that at the Rubin Museum?
It was a church, I believe. I have the ticket. I saved it.
I remember Ben Stiller came to one of those events, and I got to meet him there.
Oh, cool. And he said, my son Daniel is here helping, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Like, his son is helping him, and look at him, where is he? and today, several years ago, we're chatting about him and about other stuff. So thank you. Good luck with everything. Good luck with the book. You should do more interviews. I think you have a lot to say, and I love your perspective and your insights and the depth that you bring to this conversation, I think.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you. I'll just leave you with 2 things. Number 1, it's such a pleasure to be invited to exist in the conversational space, and just to speak to someone who's so curious and open and interested, and then has, you have such your own original experience-based takes. You've clearly lived a lot, and you've clearly considered a lot, and you're still learning. So that is my favorite kind of conversation to have. So you're clearly doing something really special with this podcast. Your listeners are very lucky, and it's an honor for me to take part. And the other thing is, if people want to hear more of this voice that you've been listening to for the last 100 minutes droning on, I am the voice of the audiobook of The Myth of Normal and all my dad's other books. So you can put me in your devices and listen in the car or wherever, if that appeals to you.
Yeah, I was watching you doing the funny voices on Instagram. That was kind of cool. Well, thank you again. I'm really appreciative of your time. Yeah.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.